everybody, how you doing? Tekking and Barry here. Oh no! Denjiro, what did you do? Orochi's dead now! No! I am not Orochi, and now I have fallen. I can't use the Orochi voice anymore throughout any of my videos. Which I feel might be rather divisive. Some people might be like, yes! No more of that stupid voice! I've had to put up with that stupid Tekking Orochi voice for the last 3 years! It's finally over! I'm still going to do the voice, you realize that, right? It's kind of like after Season 1 of Dragon Ball Abridged where Nappa dies, but they kept bringing Nappa back as Ghost Nappa. It's going to be Ghost Orochi from here until they find the One Piece, so I just want you guys to prepare for that, okay? Anywho, though, with Orochi's physical body being destroyed, I shouldn't throw those. Oh, it gently fall to the ground. There was a fan that sent me a bunch of those. I shouldn't just be chucking those around willy-nilly. It gently floated right there. It landed on my beanbag chair, if you believe it. There we go. Okay, it's safe. It's good. But yeah, with Orochi out of commission, though, we need a new Shogun, right? And so in chapter 1050, the most recent chapter, the people of the Flower Capital just completely just flabbergasted about what's going on because they did not pay attention to anything that just occurred. You know, this giant battle in the sky, you know, with like Luffy clashing with this huge magma dragon, lightning spewing, hockey shockwaves blasting off. Everybody's just having a good old-fashioned festival time, none the wiser. So, at least we finally know what Denjiro was doing the entire time Onigashima was happening, right? Because there's like a good, I don't know, 20, 30 chapters where Denjiro just disappeared and we didn't even know what was going on with the dude. And then he showed up and sliced Orochi's last head off and, you know, comforted Hiyori and be like, it's okay, everything's gonna be okay. And so now we know that he was off in various parts of the battle, I don't know, keeping notes or something. Just like, okay, so this is how the battle with Frankie and Sasaki ended. Here's the battle with King and Zoro. Just keeping records on everything because he realized that he was going to have to tell this entire story again to the hapless people of the Flower Capital, right? So, in terms of the entrance, they did a pretty good job. You know, Momonosuke showed up in the giant dragon form, and then he transformed, and when he transformed, it created a bunch of smoke, and then out of the smoke emerges the 9 red scabbards. Although I'm not exactly sure who all is going to be there, because Kinemon and Okiku were still severely wounded. Ashura Doji, I'm assuming, is still alive, but he took a pretty big blast. So we know Denjiro's there, Kawamatsu's there, Neko and Inu are there, you know, Raizo is there, obviously. We know Denjiro and Hiyori are there, as well as Momonosuke. So that's another thing, too. Like, we're going to see Momonosuke's, like, adult form probably in the next chapter, so get ready for that. But more importantly, Denjiro steps out and he's like, okay, look, this is going to be a long story, gotta start somewhere, but first and foremost, allow me to introduce, you know, your new Shogun of Wano. So, in the review, I think I set it up like Oda wanted us to believe that Momonosuke was going to be the new Shogun, okay? Because it was so obvious, you know, like Momonosuke being the son of Odin, also making his big appearance in the dragon form and then transforming, you know, it's like, oh, in the next chapter, Momonosuke is going to walk out of the smoke and he's going to look just like Odin, of course, and everybody's just going to bow and be like, oh, he's back, our savior, he is the new Shogun. But I also think it's very likely that Hiyori might, in fact, become the next Shogun, and there's a few reasons for that. First and foremost, let's look at it from this angle, okay? Momonosuke has not been in Wano for 20 years. Now, from his perspective, it's only been like 6 months, but for the majority of everybody in Wano, it's been a very, very long time. And what I mean by that is Hiyori and Denjiro have had years, literally years, to plan the assassination of Orochi, how this was all going to go down, you know, Denjiro telling Hiyori to keep the blood packs in her kimono in case they ever needed to make it look like she was going to die or get, you know, killed or whatever, and do the funeral and everything, fake her death. You know, this was all planned years in advance, okay? So I can't help but think they also had a plan ready for who's going to be the next Shogun. Denjiro has been playing the long game here in Wano for 2 decades, pretty much. And so after he, finished his yelling and screaming so much like it contorted his face in sheer rage, after he set himself up as Kiyoshiro, the boss of the Yakuza, and got in the good graces with Orochi, I would imagine he started there. And that was only a few years after Odin died. He set himself up as Kiyoshiro. It wasn't very long. And I think it was at that point that Denjiro started to plan, like, okay, how are we going to assassinate this dick? How are we going to wipe Orochi out? But also beyond that, it was like, okay, well, what's going to happen after he dies? Because the country still needs a leader, right? Now, of course, Toki had her whole message of, in 20 years, the scabbards will return and they will save all of the country and everything. Hiyori was present when Toki sent Momo, Raizo, Kanjuro, and Kinemon into the future. So Denjiro was not there for that because he was, they got distracted. I think him and Ashura-doji got, attacked by the beast pirates in the forest, so that's how they got separated. And then Nekomamushi and Inuarashi got attacked by one of the numbers, and so that's how they got separated. So even though Denjiro was not there when Toki used her powers to send them into the future, Hiyori was. So I imagine when Hiyori met Denjiro all those years later, she would have explained to him, like, yeah, no, turns out Mom could really send people through time because they disappeared right in front of me. But even so, even with that knowing that, like, Toki had time travel powers, that's still a tall order to accept that time travel exists. Like, Denjiro probably wanted to. It'd be like, yeah, okay. I mean, there's a lot of strange abilities out there. Kinemon has the ability to summon clothing out of nothing, so I can believe in time travel, like, whatever. But that's still, like, years and years and years they have to wait. And look at what happened with Ashura-doji's band. Like, it was like 10 years after Odin's death, and they were like, look, we want to believe in Toki's prophecy. We want to believe the scabbards are going to return someday, but it's already been 10 years. That's such a long time, and we're getting weaker, and we have to attack now if we're going to do it. And they tried and they failed. So it's a lot of time to ask someone to just be like, okay, just sit down and just train and keep your head down low, and eventually in 20 years the epic battle will occur. Okay, that's a tall order. So that Denjiro had a backup plan. They had a plan set in place for, like, okay, let's assume that Kinemon and the others arrive into the future, and let's assume that we fight Kaido and Orochi, and let's assume that we win. Well, what's going to happen after that? Like, Kinemon and the others, they're going to be so focused on the battle, they're probably not going to spend a lot of time thinking about what's going to happen after. Denjiro, who was able to stay behind for years and years, had that freedom, had that ability to think of a plan. Ashura did as well, but he was heading up the Mountain Bandit crew, and Kawamatsu was in prison for a lot of that. But meanwhile, Denjiro, Kiyoshiro, was like the right-hand man of Orochi, so he knew everything that was going on. I'm sure he got his hands on a bunch of important documents over the years. He knew exactly what Orochi's, schedule was for going to the bathroom, and when he went to sleep, and when he had his M&Ms. Yeah, I bet you didn't know that, but Orochi's favorite candy was M&Ms. Go figure. But anyway, yeah. So Denjiro knew all of that, right? Okay, so he knew exactly how this was going to go. So I think for that reason, it would make the most sense for him to announce Hiyori, not Momonosuke, as the Shogun. Also, just the fact that Momonosuke, yeah, he's an adult now, but he doesn't know anything about, like, the politics of Wano, He was an 8-year-old kid when he got sent into the future, and that was only 6 months ago, yeah? So, yes, he has the body of an adult, but he still doesn't know anything about, like, how to run a nation or how that works or anything like that, right? There's another angle I thought that they could take this, and it actually brought me back to one of the first Wano videos I ever made on the channel, way back in, like, 2006. When I first started talking about One Piece, which will be 6 years, this year. That is insane. It was that long ago. But this was well before Wano even started. This was back when we were still in Totland, right? And I just wanted to bring this up because there's an interesting little caste chart or pyramid of the Japanese feudal system, okay? And so obviously Wano is based on Edo. There's a few other references to, like, the Sengoku period throughout Wano, but it's mostly Edo, Japan. And so there's this caste system which starts with merchants on the bottom, because it was believed, I think, that, like, if you made a living selling other people's goods, then you're, like, at the lowest caste of society, which was interesting because I was reading about Mesoamerican culture, and merchants were actually very much on the higher end of the caste system in Mesoamerican cultures. So it just goes to show how different cultures have different values, where in Japan, it was like, oh, you're just taking other people's stuff and selling it, so therefore you didn't make it yourself, so therefore you're at the lowest caste. But meanwhile, in Mesoamerica, like, like, the Mayan culture and stuff. Oh, you're a trader or you're a merchant. Oh, that's a very popular caste system because of the service you're providing. So that's just interesting on how it goes. Then we have the artisans, that they weren't much higher up, the people that actually built stuff. Then the peasants, which were like 90% of the population. Then the ronin, the samurais without a master. And then we had the samurai as a caste themselves. Then the daimyos, which we saw in Wano, like, for example, Odin was a daimyo, Yasuie was a daimyo, Ushimaru was a daimyo. And then we have the shogun at the very top, who of course was Sukiyaki, and then Orochi squirmed his way in, and then he was the new shogun, and now who's going to be the next one after Orochi? However, you may notice we do have a class at the very tippy top of the pyramid, and that is the emperor. So I remember when I made this video, I was talking about how, like, okay, we know Orochi is going to be the shogun, but who's going to be the emperor of Wano? And that was never explored. Like, Oda never went in that direction with it, okay? So it would be very interesting if we could do something like maybe Hiyori could be the shogun, or maybe Hiyori and Denjiro together could be the shogun or something, and maybe the emperor of Wano could be Momonosuke. Because the emperor of Japan, not always, but throughout the Edo period, most notably, was not a figure of power or influence, merely a figurehead of just tradition more than anything else, okay? The idea goes that the Japanese emperor line, that family line, goes all the way back to the original emperor, Emperor Jimmu, who was purportedly the grandson of Amaterasu, the sun god, okay? So that line of the emperors is very important to the people of Japan because it's that tether, it's that rope that connects all the way back to the deities of the creators of the island of Japan itself, okay? Emperor Jimmu, even if he ever existed, it's one of those things where it's like history mixes with fantasy and mythology, and it's like sort of creates a whole other like figure, So for example, like biblical Jesus versus historical Jesus, different kind of figures depending on which source you're looking at. That kind of situation is what we're working with. And it didn't just stop and start with Jimmu. There were, I think, the first, I think Yamato's namesake, because there was an Emperor Yamato that was, I think, the 8th or 9th emperor of Japan, and that person is also considered like a mythological figure, was they a real person or just mixed with mythology? Probably was a real person, but just had a lot of stuff thrown onto them later, kind of a situation like that, right? So when the Tokugawa took over Japan in the Edo period, right, after the Sengoku, after the Warring States era, the emperor stayed in power, but the shogun held all the cards. They were the ones that controlled everything, okay, the Tokugawa at the time. Now, you might be wondering, why did the Tokugawa, like, allow the emperor to live? The emperor has the fancy palace and all the servants and everything and gets to live a life of luxury, but doesn't really serve any purpose practically. Why would the emperor even continue to stay? Or rather, why didn't the Tokugawa just, like, assassinate the emperor? Or maybe not assassinate, but just remove them from power, and then just Tokugawa was like, we are now the emperors of Japan. The reason they didn't do that, I feel, is because of the tradition, because like we're not going to mess with this godly family line. We're still the ones that have all the power, but the emperor is there more for the people. Okay, and then after the opening of Japan by the black ships, after the United States basically strong-armed their way into opening up Japan with like gunboat diplomacy during the end of the Edo period into the Bakumatsu period, then the Meiji Restoration, Emperor Meiji became the true symbol of power, and the emperor rose again to prominence in Japan, okay? So the fact that there's not really an emperor class in Wano, and since we're going with a lot of Edo-based themes here, and after an open borders in Wano is also a big deal. I made a whole video about that. Now, Momonosuke said in the last chapter that he's not planning on opening Wano right this instant because of the government there. But still, before One Piece is concluded, the Wano nation will be opened up to the world. That's kind of the whole point. I think that's like the storytelling device that Oda's going with here, just not right this moment, right? So if we're going along with the logic of after the U.S. opened Japan, all of a sudden the emperor rises to an actual position of real power, and then Wano opens up, maybe this is the moment where we actually do get an emperor. This is like the changing point for Wano, where it begins with Momonosuke. Momonosuke, in terms of a shogun, in terms of an actual leader that knows about political intrigue and everything, Momonosuke, he wouldn't really be all that great at that. But in terms of just a figure, of just a person that's that the people of Wano can look up to and be like, that is our emperor. That is the person that is the top of the pyramid of Wano. He is the son of Odin, the grandson of Sukiyaki. Odin, the man that did, he fought against Kaido in the Hour of Legends. That is our leader. But then also having somebody more practical suited for the job like Denjiro or Hiyori or maybe like all the scabbards. I'm kind of thinking Oda's going to do a spin on it where we're expecting Oda to just say like there's going to be one shogun, like Denjiro is going to step out and he's going to be like, Hiyori's the new shogun. There you go. But I'm thinking that he might do a twist. He might do a twist where it's like, I'm your new shogun. But it's not just going to be me, Denjiro. It's also going to be all of the scabbards. Maybe. That wouldn't be a bad idea. Or rather, maybe, once again, you could just have, like, Hiyori is the shogun. And she would know more about, like, the people of Wano being Komurasaki for so many years, that persona, and the people would definitely flock to her, maybe not all just for her political ideas, mostly just because, like, she's pretty. But still, like, she would gain the trust of the people, is what I'm trying to say here. That's the main point of that, okay? So she would gain the trust of the people, and she would know a decent amount about, like, that kind of stuff, like humanitarian sort of policies and things. But when it came to maybe more specific things, more complicated political, situations and stuff, maybe, she can rely on like a team of like a council, which will like Denjiro, Kinemon, Kawamatsu and stuff. Things of that nature, kind of. And then meanwhile, Momonosuke does serve a role, but it's not really a specific role in terms of like actually, controlling all of Wano because he just doesn't have the skills for that. You know what I mean? Until he eventually maybe gets to a point where he actually does learn all that stuff, and then maybe you can make something happen with that. I don't know. But that's my idea on how the Shogun thing is going to go. I'm thinking it's going to be Hiyori. I'm really leaning on that with like Denjiro and everybody serving as her council or like, whatever. If you ever watch Game of Thrones, like the small council or whatever, kind of a situation like that. It could also be a situation where maybe Denjiro comes out and says, we don't have a shogun anymore, but I really doubt that that's going to be a thing because once again, even though the people have been severely oppressed by Orochi and Kaido over the years, the people of Wano are still very keen on their tradition, right? The tradition of the nation. It might even be a situation because Wano has a very long and storied history and we don't know everything. I think I also made a video about the history of Wano itself being isolated for as long as it has been, even longer than Japan in real life. The Edo period started right after Sekigahara, so it was like 1604, 1605 that the Edo period officially started, and that closed-door isolationist policy began, and then it was, I think, 1853 when Perry opened up the nation, through the U.S., through the gunboats and stuff like that. So that was like 250 years that Japan was isolated. Meanwhile, Wano was isolated since the Void Century, which was like 800 years plus. Okay, so it's been a very, very long time they've been isolated. So their history is a lot more insular and different from the rest of the world. It used to be called the country of gold, for instance, right? So thinking about that logic, maybe way back in the day of Wano, maybe during Toki's time, back during that era, maybe the emperor did exist. There was actually an emperor. Maybe it was the Kozukis that are sort of the Tokugawa in this instant, where the Kozukis sort of took over Wano, closed the doors, got rid of the emperor class altogether, and that was just 800 years ago, so everybody just forgot about it. So the highest class that there existed was the shogunate, and then that's it. That's where it stops. So maybe Denjiro, though, digging through, having access to all the paperwork and everything in Orochi's castle, he was going through the papers one night, all the records of ancient Wano, might be some stuff in there about the Void Century, definitely, and maybe he found records of like, hey, it says here that back in the day, there used to be an emperor of Wano. This was like 800 years ago, back when it was known as the Nation of Gold, and the Emperor, blah, 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 and then there was the Shogun. It was like, interesting, the Kozukis changed that. So that would also be pretty symbolic of like, okay, the Kozukis aren't entirely blameless here. They might have done some, bad stuff back in the day, or some stuff that had some negative consequences in the future. So maybe this could be their way of like, okay, we're not only going to get rid of Orochi, we're not only going to remove all, stuff that he did in the factories and the, the slavery and stuff. We're not only going to do that, but we're also going to, take away the mistakes that the Kozukis did as well. And we're going to reinstate, the Emperor of Wano as it used to be back in antiquity. Something like that would actually be really cool, and it would be very poetic, a good way to end Wano, I guess I should say. But yeah, who's going to be the next Shogun? I really don't think overall, like, you could say Denjiro, you could say Hiyori, you could even see Momonosuke just with, like, Denjiro helping him out or whatever. That could work as well. But I like this idea of bringing the Emperor into it. I think that would really work for the Wano aesthetic, right? Well, anyway, that was the video. Thanks for watching, everybody. I got most of that done in one take. That's very few times that actually happens. I've made like 2,000 videos on YouTube. Very often, less than often. See, now I'm messing up at the very end. I'll do a video pretty much in one take. I think I messed up one time, and that was it. But other than that, anyway, now we're going on to horse facts. Nay! Cue the intro.
Tekking talks about horses.
All right, so last time we talked about the Shire horse, which was the largest horse breed in the world, and a lot of people brought up Clydesdales because I erroneously stated that the Shire was used in Budweiser commercials, and that was actually inaccurate because it's only Clydesdales that are used in Budweiser commercials because that is the symbol of the company Budweiser. Now, I don't drink Budweiser, but Barry does. I pull out a Budweiser, no. But I actually do have a friend that works for Budweiser, so that's interesting. Maybe I can talk to him about this. I should have had him on for this, but whatever. Anyway, so, Clydesdales, though, they're a Scottish breed that were actually, because this is the name, this is awesome. There used to be a river, I guess there still is a river, called River Clyde, and so there was a town on the side of River Clyde called Clydesdale. Dale as in, like, a town or a village. There you go, Clydesdale. And so that's kind of where the horse originated. It was around, I think, 1877 when the Breed Society was founded. That's a name for an organization. The Breed Society. Horse breeds, ladies and gentlemen. That's when the breed began to be sent all over the world and become very popular. It was used as a war horse a lot during World War I. That actually diminished their numbers quite a bit. Actually, was it a Clydesdale that was in the movie War Horse? I never saw it, but it was the one with Tom Hiddleston in it, the guy that played Loki in, Loki and also Thor. But there was a movie War Horse, and he was in that. I don't know if that was a war horse because it was World War I. I don't know. But they were still used for agriculture and logging and stuff like that. They're very much prized just because of their coat and their large size as draft horses and, the pull stuff, and also their feathery kind of feet because they have like their, I don't know, what is it called? Their fur? Not their fur, their coat, I guess. I don't know. But their feet has like, white pillowy like hair coming off of it. So it looks cool, right? Whatever. Anyway, this is the story though of how they became the mascot for Budweiser beer, okay? So this is actually right after the Prohibition era, I guess. So Prohibition in the U.S. lasted for most of the 1920s, I want to say, 1920s, 1930s, around there. And then after Prohibition was ended with the 21st Amendment that appealed the 18th Amendment, and, beer could be sold, liquor was available again, I guess the Budweiser Corporation was like, we need a new mascot for our beer, because this is a whole new, it's like Prohibition's over with. We can, ramp up production. We don't have to keep to the speakeasies anymore. It's like we're back to it, right? And so they decided to pick the Clydesdales, and the Clydesdales are often always seen in Budweiser commercials or in like parades and stuff. You always see the Clydesdales carrying like the cart of Budweiser beer to the town or whatever like that. And so they're very prized and famous horses for that reason. But anyway, yeah, it's the Clydesdale. Also, they're used for crossbreeding to kind of like improve other horse species that might be like, weakening or might be in danger of like being, dying off or whatever. Some of this crossbreeding works better than others, but, that's just how that goes, right? Anyway, that's the horse fact for today. Thanks for watching, everybody. This will be Tekking and Barry and Denjiro signing out. Later, everyone.